John?
It's not too bad right now. It a couple of weeks ago it was a lot worse, but right now is and it never got as bad as the pictures I've seen in New York right now.
Yeah, that was bad.
My friend sent me this photo he found on the internet for the Diablo 4
Oh
thing. It
yeah.
said like "Welcome to Hell, New York." And it was like yellow.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
It's a
Hello.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hey, Marina. Oh, find the- I've got too many tag security channels now too. I have to find the right working group one. All right, here we go. Here is the top level notes document and throw today on there.
Hey, 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 stop.
I thought you were
Sorry.
talking to Brandon for signing into last week.
No, no. So just
Hey,
got a new
hey,
couch on Tuesday, and the cat is already trying to scratch it.
Oh no.
hey, John. A couple of weeks ago, you shared a link with me that there was a talk in some conference about why scanning containers is not sufficient, and you need to do more. I kind of lost that. If you could share with me again, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that was the malicious compliance talk. Let me just find should be able to find the YouTube. Oh my God, I did not expect there to be a bunch of uh responses for malicious compliance. Okay. Or maybe it's because I'm using the wrong search engine. Or I will find it and I'll share a link. I think it's probably in the tag security channel as well too. Um, did anybody have anything today other than working session going over the document?
What only one quick thing. Uh, so in the middle of the New York apocalypse, ended up going to one of the things I think was that's interesting and maybe something we should look at figuring out a little bit more, which is if I take a step back, uh, outside of our sort of cybersecurity bubble, a lot of folks are not super familiar with supply chain security. You know, obviously it's a bit of a buzzword. And I know that it was interesting because I went to we were at DevOps Days, which was in or DevOps Days New York City, which was Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, and we found maybe about 10% of folks were familiar with the term software supply chain security. About another 10%, you know, a lot of it being overlap, where folks were familiar with stuff like SBOMs. But everybody, I would say the vast majority of folks were familiar with stuff like the attacks and why it was like generally important. But I think they found it very interesting that like, oh, actually people are looking at it as if it's like this big category of thing, which anyway, there's something there that I just wanted to kind of throw out there. I don't know if it's like a, you know, separate from what we're writing for the executives, maybe something like a, hey, this is software supply chains. Like, here's like a one-page summary of what software supply chain security is and why we kind of consider it, let's say, a little different than how you might consider normal, let's say, network security or whatever, right?
So I've been spending a bit of time thinking about framing that over the past several weeks, and I think there's two things in software supply chain that we need to really focus on. The first one is people already have a good understanding of, which is how do I keep malicious actors from affecting my supply chain, and that's a whole thing. But there's also a second part that people don't tend to consider, which is people are going to make mistakes. Bugs are going to enter into the source code that we build, which then gets delivered out to all these different areas. So if you look at Log4Shell as an example, as far as we know, there was no malicious intent. So all of the work that was put in order to prevent the malicious actor from injecting the thing would have not been helpful with Log4Shell. Instead, the problem that we had with Log4Shell was very poor ability to tell where that piece of software was, whether it ended up in another piece of infrastructure, what version, or any way to easily replace it out. So in other words, it's that whole provenance step and tracing that was missing, and those poor practices is so like Log4Shell itself. The thing that made it so expensive was actually not purely the fact that it operated the way that it did, but the fact that our supply chain practices were so poor that it was extremely expensive to go and fix the problem once we discovered it.
Yeah, definitely agree there, because I think when a lot of folks who were there, because it was a DevOps conference, a lot of them were from like SREs, and a lot of folks were like, hey, it's not just for them, it was less about my software uses Log4j somewhere in it. It's more I've deployed a server and some piece of monitoring software has Log4j in it, and we needed to figure out where that lived. Which was also sort of an interesting challenge, and I know for a lot of those folks as well is like they were like wishing that they had that information about provenance at their fingertips, as opposed to going through and they saying, great, somebody starts emailing out a spreadsheet and everybody starts doing like OS queries type scans against every single server, and trying to find where this thing might live, as opposed to, hey, we have something like a complete CMDB of all the things we're pulling into our environments, and their dependencies and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I definitely. It's always super interesting to go to the more local conferences like that, or with a very different set of attendees than like a KubeCon or something else. I was at a local conference, Open Source North, and it's amazing. Like there were talks from agile coaches who worked at like pretty large local companies in the Twin Cities metro area. We have, for whatever reason, like not as many as like New York City, but we have a lot of Fortune 500 companies in this area: Best Buy, Target, some banks, some 3M, General Mills, and they're still going through an agile transformation, like trying to figure out like how we do agile software development. They're still trying to figure out how to do DevOps, as some of them say. And cloud native is not their forte either. But they are, like exactly like you said, about like they've experienced Log4j. They know what it's like to have to deal with that, but they don't know they don't know that it can be better. They're just like, oh, this is this annoying thing that some separate part of our organization doing security like threw over the fence and said, like, do all this work. And they haven't realized how they could help be a part of the solution. They just view a lot of it as someone else's problem. And I think it's for a lot of different reasons, but it's interesting to have those conversations. Cool. And the Scourge CFP, that's coming up, security and practice. I think there could be a lot of good opportunity for folks here.
Yeah, so for the security practice, it's just it's like that's an industry track. If folks want to do a research paper, there's also a track for that. But I figured that this could be interested in that.
We have an internal conference that we do where people can write like research paper style. That it is like it's a whole different skill set as opposed to like a KubeCon CFP.
Yeah, exactly. The security practice I think will be more familiar to folks here. It's just a normal CFP. Yeah.
You mean you actually have to write the content before you submit the talk?
Yeah.
And you can't just make stuff up. You have to cite your sources.
Is this a suggestion for KubeCon? We could do this.
Well, that would be one way to make it a shorter conference.
Definitely.
All right. Let's switch over to the supply chain security draft document. I'll share the link here. It's in the agenda as well. Brandon, you were not here last time. Do you want to do a quick like summary, kind of like of your content and additions?
Yeah, I can do that. So let me hold on. Let me maybe share my screen. So this one, yeah. Can you see my screen? The window with the text?
Yep, looks good.
We can.
So basically, I was writing some content for the security and the uncertainty area, and kind of like I was reusing a little bit of the content I wrote for something else. But the main thing that I started writing here was around, okay, yeah, we start with like known threats, right? Like things that vulnerabilities that are known, blah blah blah. We're using like vulnerability databases to kind of figuring that out. And these are things that we know, right? These are things that we can quantify. We can potentially like assign a risk score to. And then there are things that are so-called like evolving, right? Like the idea is like, if you have like Log4Shell, doesn't mean like before the CVE was published that means Log4Shell wasn't there, right? It was there, it was living there, and the question is like, would your decision around it change? And I think there's two parts of it. One part that I talk about is like once things are public, that there's a higher risk factor for them to be exploited, but also like thinking about things that have not been discovered yet and how to think about it. And then I talk about like reasoning under uncertainty, where you have unknown security threats, then you kind of have to have a proxy for like help of these things.
You said something that tickled my brain a little bit there, Brendan, which is how would that impact your decisions around this? And one of the things that I think many people misunderstand is most of the assets that you're consuming via the supply chain, you made no decisions about at all.
Yeah.
And you can't actually make decisions about them in many cases.
Yeah. I think that's I feel like that's currently like how it is, but I feel like that's not how it should be.
Well, but it has to be that way, and the reason it has to be that way is because engineers are lazy. It's what we pay them for. And the reason it got that way is because we paid engineers to be lazy, and so engineers built dependency graphs for things so they could say, I want a foo, and not worry about the fact that 6 levels down in the graph, somebody writing bar included Log4Shell by mistake, by depending on a Log4j instance of some sort, right? that they stuck in some jar, and they they shadowed, and then they pulled in so they could make sure they got exactly the behavior they thought they wanted, and mumble. And so it is actually one of those things where not all the decision, most of the time it's not the result of overt decisions you made, and the amount of control you have over it varies wildly, right? So if you've got something in a Golang world where there's a security vulnerability 6 levels down in the Go mods that you built, right? If the guy who is 4 levels down in the Go mods hasn't moved his dependency, and the dependency shift involves an API change, all you can really do is maybe push the guy a PR and hope for the best.
Or fork it.
Well, even if you fork it, you still have. Yeah, you not only do you own it, but you also have all of the things that are above it that depend on it as well, that you now own as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you fork it, you're really forked.
Yeah. Unless you have a lot of resources to handle that.
Yes. We all know that you have the magical monorepo. You don't need to rub it in.
Magical monorepos are not good for third party. I can tell you that. Someone's gonna own it. Just saying. Yeah, so
we're happy to know that it exists. We just don't get to enjoy it.
Yeah, so yeah, I think exactly that. And I think I wrote a little bit here, like, maybe like there are some things that you can kind of do, right? Which is like, people do security audits for a reason. People evaluate, do like CIS benchmarks hardening for a reason and things like that, right? I think there is it's still like a base level of things you can do, or like indicators you can say that, okay, this is kind of a proxy of like how often a vulnerability, this thing gets hit by vulnerability, and like, how you would think about what is the chances that, what is the risk of a container breakout happening, would be maybe based on some historical data around like container breakouts and things like that. So another thing I added here at the end is kind of like, when it comes to unknown unknowns, it's not just threats, it's also like the data that you have. So basically, like, even if your SBOM tells you whether they're complete, maybe the library is the list of libraries is not complete, the dependencies are not complete.
I would actually say that more significant in my mind than the risk of incompleteness is the risk of overpopulated. Because if you look at the fire hose of CVEs that most folks are living under, and the reality of limited remediation resources, effectively we have a denial of service attack via CVEs at this point going on against most people's security organizations. And it doesn't really matter if I have a CVE because somebody failed to include it in the SBOM at some point along the line, or if I have a CVE because I've spent all of my energy chasing other CVEs. I still have a CVE.
So I have to me that's a issue that also I think lies in the fact that a lot of CVEs, even if they are there, aren't actionable by the people that have the reports. And so, like, I feel like that the stuff can be done with the bags and having that whole ecosystem to kind of like fix that, so that, like, the CVEs can be there, but they get auto remediated by process.
Oh, that's a whole other problem. Like, and I think Vex is very promising for that problem, right? Which is, I may actually legitimately have a component that has a CVE, but I don't actually use the thing that would cause the CVE to be active. That's one set of problems. I'm literally talking about somebody claims I have a CVE from glibc and I'm running an Alpine container problem.
Gotcha. I see. So like accuracy.
Yeah, which runs both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, that accuracy is something that it has the not has potential, but makes SBOMs of negative value to consumers. So, like, there has to be work necessary in order to make them more accurate. But that's not a problem that we can necessarily solve in this location.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty much what I wrote so far. It already got like started getting a bit long. I'm not sure, John, whether like what we were aiming for this. But I think there's definitely probably parts that we can trim and elaborate
by the
on.
way, by the way, don't take my commentary as too negative. I've been catching up because I've been out for a little bit, and I must say that like the early part of the document makes me squeal with delight. So, don't take my comments as too negative.
Yeah, so I think we've noticed a little bit of a pattern between each of the three sections, which is they take a little bit of time to ramp up. There's kind of some introductory portions to each to set the context better. I think now we're at the easy part and the hard part of iterating on this. It's definitely like as a whole already too long. I think especially targeting the executive level, Brandon's proposal the other week was like 2 pages max. Like it would be really great for a conference. We would print it out front and back and hand it out to people. We've talked about 5 pages maybe, but having really clear and concise like sections so that people can flip through it a little bit more. The question is how do we get to that point? Like we definitely can like iterate on the content in the specific sections, but the other thing we talked about was on the resolution part of some of the resolutions are a little bit overlapping, and so the approach that you would take to solving things at scale and solving things for unknowns and solving things over time, like they may be kind of similar. And like a lot of this, and I think Brandon, you touched on it a little bit in what you were describing, is like having the right processes in place in a general sense. So that's something I think that we can draw as a conclusion across all of the sections. It's just like how do we get from here to there, and what works for people. So definitely open to thoughts or suggestions on that.
So I'm going to be slightly heretical for a second, if that's okay, and say that I'm not convinced that executives read. Which is to say, I see the value in white papers. There's a certain type of personality that dives deeper for whom they're actually excellent. And they actually are designed to be entirely self-contained and consumable. But so I'm not suggesting we don't write a paper. I think that's actually valuable. But we may also, as a companion to it, want to produce a very brief slide deck that is suitable for people to go and slide in front of an executive in under 5 minutes. So that they can actually, preferably a shiny deck. Executives like shiny objects. So that we actually have something there, and that may punctuate our thinking somewhat potentially. I don't know. Now, I say this as someone who is over-rotated on slide production because I come from a slide and meeting culture. God help me. So your mileage may vary, and the world is a wildly variable place. But I did want to mention that as a thought.
That's actually, it's really interesting. And the way that I typically approach something like that is more of like and I think a presentation for conveying this information for me would be different, maybe similar to like a conference talk style, but there's always, I don't typically put all of the words on the slides. I put a picture describing what it is, or like visualizing. And
you've just captured precisely why white papers matter, right? And I absolutely wholeheartedly support that. slides are meant to be presented, and they're woefully inadequate without presentation, or they suck terribly because you've written a white paper in PowerPoint. Right?
Exactly.
So I think they have to. You doing a slide deck by itself is insufficient. You may want to consider pairing.
So one of the things that I tend to do for people, because even 5 minutes for an executive is a lot of time and unlikely to get it in many scenarios. The thing that I tend to recommend is that the slides be designed historically slides be designed for like the top level architect who you could get 5 minutes worth of time with, but for the executives to really focus on what the value proposition is. And I tend to recommend people make content that would fit on a baseball card. And yes, actually printing on a baseball card is an option, because you're saying exactly what it is, what's the point, you're getting straight to it, you have 30 seconds to a minute to get there, but also something that they can take with them to remind them of the points at a later time. I think if ideally a CISO would be able to spend more time, hopefully, but I wouldn't count on it because they're often trying to put out fires that have to be fixed today, as opposed to how do I set up my strategy for the next 5 to 10 years.
That reminded me of one other thing I think that's slightly lacking based on the content we have that we or at least I remember talking about before. And my memory is not much the best. Like connecting some of what we're talking about to business value for executives, so that like even though we have 3 higher level sections, they're still maybe too detailed or specific to connect directly back to some of that higher level business value. And the things I think that we talked about a little bit is just like the cost of the security compromises, I think, are one thing. The interference with your ability to do all of the other stuff that makes you money, like building new features and delivering new versions of your software, all of that sort of thing. Like the faster you can respond to all the security stuff and supply chain stuff lets you do your day-to-day job more.
So I have a slide that I will sometimes use in decks as many as 5 times that says the following words: velocity is the only thing that matters, which I think is what you're getting at.
Yes, I like that phrasing much better.
It's punchy, and the reason I use it sometimes as much as 5 times with certain audiences in the same deck is it's the thing you want to club people over the head with like a baby seal. Because like if people are like, well, what about quality? It's like, great, how fast can you move when main is broken? You know, quality is downstream of velocity.
Well, to make it worse, one constraint that I often see, and it's one that I keep in mind when I think of these, is so we'd like to do these extra things, but we can add 0 headcount. And so if the solution is go hire a bunch of people in order to make this work, it's unlikely that it'll gain any traction. Now they are willing to readjust their current working, which means there'll be something else that is ramped down a bit, maybe not eliminated, but perhaps ramped down. But generally, these are very resource constrained environments, and the executives that make this decision on where the dollars go tend to look at security as a cost center, despite the fact that bad security is a significant slowdown and good security tends to be an accelerator, but they don't tend to think of it that way.
Well, they also tend to think of ROI because you're always going to have a finite amount of resources devoted to security, always. And so you'd like to get the highest ROI for that dedication of resources.
It's almost like it's economics.
Yeah, well, I will sometimes, when I'm in a bombastic mood, which is most of the time, you'll basically say, I don't believe in security, I only believe in economics. Because nothing is ever secure. The only question is, what's the ROI on applying resources to make it more secure? And that's where supply chain security, I think, has a lot of challenges, and I think they're solvable challenges. But making the ROI, the information that's revealed, better than what it is currently.
Brandon, I was about to say something, and I'm waiting for you.
Oh no, I think this got me a little bit thinking about like, oh, maybe like there exists some probably not in the scope of this document. That's why I was like kind of hesitating whether on to say not to detract, but like seems like there if we can kind of provide a framework of thinking that will tie in like, oh yeah, obviously like the way that these things get adopted is like, or if I think about it a different way, maybe I can get a better bang for my buck, or like allow me to allocate resources elsewhere. That'll be useful, but probably not going to be part of this particular document, right? That would be
Well, there is a balancing act. You're correct, Brandon, where we have to be not too discouraging.
Yeah, I think there's also something kind of more from a practical standpoint, which is because I think these are all valuable discussions. I am just a little worried that we've been having some of the same discussions now for over 5 months about exactly what this sort of document should look like, what should this do, and I think they're valuable discussions. I'm just wondering if we're still kind of having that level of discussion of like, hey, are we still not quite sure if the white paper is enough and we need stuff like either a slide deck or something much more concise? Does it make sense for us to maybe have something like, another set of discussions on that and shelve sort of the actual work that we're doing on that document and focus on maybe a different body of work that, folks can really sink their teeth into?
I like that. I feel like this document, there is value in like having these things, and like I rather we get something out. Maybe it's like useful to 50% of what we originally thought it would be, and then iterate and work on either the next version or the kind of a follow-up document or follow-up set of resources.
So you first, please.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to say that I think that because I think there are a lot of different companies with a lot of different sizes, and so their execs will have different amounts of time. I think if we write a document at a level, maybe like somewhat high level, but a level that we can write, I think folks at that company can always write summaries and stuff like that. If it needs to be shortened further, because I think they'll know for their company what to do. I think it's hard for us as a group to make something universal, so we may as well make something. I don't know.
We could also start with just publishing a definition. Like we had a really good discussion on what does it mean to be a supply, like what does supply chain security actually mean? And based upon that, like that alone, people are still trying to wrap their head around what the problem is itself. So even if we presented no solutions, we just framed the problem to help people reason through it. Like even that would be with a cloud native context, of course. Even that would be incredibly valuable. And
so sounds like a different effort, right? I think that there is some level of overlap, but that is itself the purpose of the document is a little bit different. So I think that could be a separate document, and like I don't want to detract away from a lot of the valuable points that I made in this document, and so like maybe what are your thoughts on like let's have that as a separate effort, just like defining supply chain security?
Yeah, I mean, my tendency, as I said, there's a lot I've been reading in this document. I've been gone for a while. That's making me squeal at the light. There's a lot of good stuff in this document. I think probably sort of in support of what John and Michael were saying is let's downscope it, solidify it, and get it the hell out the door, and keep a running list of the follow-up documents that we need. Because there's this deep tendency when you got the one piece of work in front of you to want to shove all the things into the one piece of work. I am, by the way, the very worst at this. So feel free to whack me upside my head with my own statements later. But basically just take a machete to the document until we've got the strongest, smartest, simplest version of what we're going to say first, and get it the hell out the door, and keep a running tally of what class of documents we need to do next.
So, what is the best ways to start hacking and slashing at this thing? Given some of the things I mentioned earlier, maybe it's just best for one person to try and take a stab at that, so to say. Yeah, such a violent description language to this conversation today. But
I do
apologies for
apologize.
that.
I tend towards violent metaphors, and that's on me.
I can. One of the things I'm thinking to start with is trying to remove as much from the specific content sections to an introduction, so that we could have maybe a more concise introduction that sets the context for the three main sections, and then we can trim those three sections down as much as possible, and then also extract the resolutions to try and have that also as a separate, more concise, singular place. I think that those two things would help limit the scope and reduce the size of things. Does anybody have any objections to that? Since I'm volunteering to take on the work, I'm not guessing there would be.
I actually was gonna say that, yeah, one person should go through it, make kind of like a opinionated view, and then just like highlight bases and say it's like this is important, and then we are missing this, and this, and then we can go back to just editing the content a little bit more, and then we should be good. So yeah, perfectly. I like your proposal.
All right, cool. I will try to have. I'll have progress for sure next week, and we can take a look at that. Awesome. I definitely, yeah, I like some of the ideas for follow-on work, and we'll all hold each other accountable to make sure that we put that to the side for now. Awesome. I think that's good for today. Anything else anyone else wants to chat about? All right, I am in favor of adjourning early. I appreciate the comments and the feedback and the contributions from everybody this week, and excited to see next week how it goes.